What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Row YouTube channel, Dynasty version. We're going to be looking at one Dynasty asset right now that should you be buying, should you be selling, should you be holding, and that is Tony Pollard from the Dallas Cowboys. The running back has kind of got off a slow start this season. He has not lived up to ADP, but can he down the stretch? So if you're a contender, is he someone that you should go buy? We're going to be looking at Dynasty values, but also real Dynasty trades that are happening in your leagues to kind of give you a better idea of what Tony Pollard should be going for in your Superflex Dynasty League. So you know the drill. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll dive into Tony Pollard value and Dynasty outlook on the other side. All right, let's talk about Tony Pollard and overall what he's done this year and just kind of go over some of the stats and just kind of give you a general outlook, right? He's not lived up to the ADP that he was previously, but, you know, this is the season totals that we're looking at prior to this last week that he had against the Panthers, right? Week 11, where he was a running back 10. So he did finally finish in that. When you're looking overall, though, he's only finished as, you know, a top 10 running back in PPR. So when you're looking at overall, you know, basically one time. That was in week 1. After that, he's been hanging around running back 25 to 20 in those ranges, which is not what you want from a guy that you spent maybe, you know, in terms of dynasty, you know, 3rd, 4th round, maybe a 2nd round pick. It depended on kind of your league and your league value. Their redraft, I know he's definitely underperformed this year. So from a perspective that you see there, he is the lead guy though. So when we're talking about Tony Pollard and what he is, he's the lead guy undoubtedly in that backfield, right? He hasn't necessarily seen the touches from that. Like he's had 12, 12, 15, and 12 the last 4 games. But he's playing 65% of the snaps. He is the PPR guy. He is averaging about 14 touches in terms of that. So, like, we've seen him there. I think the thing that he struggled with, he just hasn't looked good yards after contact, right? He ranks 31st in missed tackles for us, so he hasn't been able to break a lot of runs. That injury has definitely slowed him up a little bit. So, overall, right now in his season totals, it does not look great. But now that he had that week 11 where he was running back 10, he got 5 targets, 4 catches. He got in the end zone, finally in the red zone. Like, are we talking about, and it was a great run that he had. Are we talking about him being kind of that running back 10 to 15 range where you can go buy him right now at a price that's very good if you're a contender and you're like, hey, I'm just going to ride him out, right? That is, I think, the question that we have to ask ourselves as we dive into this video, the profile. From an offensive scheme, like I said, he's been used. You see him in the, you know, targets. He already has 40 targets this year, 33 catches. We know that's there. You know, from a rushing standpoint, they didn't really need him in this game towards the end of the second half. So 33-10 win against Carolina. You know, I do think that he's going to kind of go down the stretch against Washington, Seattle, Philly, Buffalo, Miami. They have a tough stretch of games, but I don't think the defenses that they're playing are the best. I think rest of season, you know, he's looking at a high-end running back 2 probably is what you'd expect from him. Now, what you expect and what he gives you are 2 very different things that we've seen. But the usage has been there, and I always advocate follow the volume, follow the usage, and in PPR leagues, and especially with him getting the carries that he's getting, I do think the Cowboys are going to lean on him. I think they gave him that 1-year deal to say, hey, we're going to ride you out, and I think they are going to ride him out down the stretch of the year. I do expect him to get the usage. I was never really high on Pollard. I don't have any Pollard shares, none. I don't have any there, so just full disclosure, but I do think if you're a contender, based on the price, he might be willing to, you know, kick some tires on. What are you willing to give up for Tony Pollard? You might be okay, especially if you lost somebody. Let's say you lost Ken Walker this last weekend, or some of these other running backs have not necessarily performed the way that you wanted. Maybe you go see what the price is on Pollard and you plug him in and you hope that he gives you that running back 10 type numbers that can get you over the top. Now, let's take a look here in terms of what his dynasty outlook is. You know, overall, when you're talking about dynasty outlook, and this is kind of his value throughout the offseason and in the season, you know, it's pretty low right now, but I think this is what it was always going to be with Tony Pollard. Like, I think his peak was going to be before the season started because people expected the usage there. But I do think he could see a bump up, right? So, like, if he does perform the next 2 weeks, if you don't have a trade deadline in your league, you might hold, because I do think if he bumps up, he puts together a couple, you know, running back 10 numbers again in PPR standpoints, you could see him maybe being that guy that is able to kind of put together a string of games that improves his value. Now, overall, though, like, I think the question is, what is he next year? You know, I don't know if Dallas brings him back. I think Dallas is going to be on the market in the draft. Maybe they get a cheaper deal with him. I think his dynasty is value is volatile because the running back position is just destroyed right now. He might be a fun guy to go grab in the off season, right? Before he finds a team, or maybe he's in free agency, he's not sought after very well. But I think just because of that volatility, he's a hard prospect to gauge in terms of long-term dynasty value. And I think the market reflects that a little bit. So let's look at the Superflex values, right? So when you're talking about like where he's at ranked all across the board, he's running back 17 for keep, trade, cut. For football guys, he's running back 12. So he's a little bit sought after in football guys' rankings. And our rankings here at TDR, he's running back 19. So we're the low people on the totem pole, so to speak. Now, when you're looking at like what he's done and value in Superflex leagues, Pollard or Rondale Moore for a second or third and a second. Trevor Lawrence and Tony Pollard for Justin Herbert. That's a fun tier up there. If you want to, if you have Trevor Lawrence, I know he just went off last week, but if you feel like you want to go pivot to Justin Herbert and you add Tony Pollard to that might be a way for you to kind of value him. Like, hey, put him in a piece with another piece and tier up at a position. I always advocate for tiering up and trying to find that extra value there. He did go straight up for Kenneth Walker, and that's an interesting deal because Walker's injury, we don't know what necessarily it is at this point as I'm recording this video. Would you be willing to maybe, you get a little younger, you hope Walker comes back for the playoffs, and then maybe that the Walker, owner's worried, he wants to get Pollard because he's a contender, he's got to go win now, he's got an old team. Pollard for a first is pretty much what he's been going for. I saw a bunch on crowdsourcing to those mid first out there. So 24 first, mid to late first. Yeah, I struggle with that. I would not want anything after like the 106 or higher than the 106. You're looking at Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors being in there. Obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake May, Caleb Williams in that area. That is not a good deal for Tony Pollard. But if it's a late first, I get it. James Cook, Tony Pollard for Austin Eckler and Tyler Higbee. Then you have Tony Pollard in a second for Jonathan Taylor. Oh, my God. If that really happened out there, and it did, I looked at the fantasy calc area, go get Jonathan Taylor, right? Like I would be all aboard the Jonathan Taylor train on that deal. I would most likely that's got to probably be a first if you're in a real dynasty league. But if you can maybe ship it off and maybe get a counter, right? I think that's a way to kind of kick the tires. And then this one is interesting. So Ford and Pollard for, J.K. Dobbins and, a 24 first. I don't love the Dobbins move, but I don't mind getting that first back, right? And then, hey, you take a shot on Dobbins and hope he comes back. And Ford and Pollard look like this year assets where you get that first back. I don't know. I think that's an interesting way. I think contender-wise, I like Ford and Pollard because of what they've been able to do. Now, in one quarterback leagues, here's his value right now. For Keaton Mitchell in a first. For T. Higgins, man, I smashed the T. Higgins side. I absolutely love building through the wide receiver, especially in one quarterback leagues and PPR. I think that's a really good move. Pollard and first for Kenneth Walker. That's what I think the interesting value shifts are from one quarterback Superflex. We just saw it recently with Kenneth Walker on the last slide that we were kind of looking at there. Now you have a first going for him for Kenneth Walker here. So that's kind of the value shifts that we've seen. Tony Pollard in a second for Brian Robinson. Man, Brian Robinson's a top 5 running back right now. Like, if you can maybe go get Brian Robinson, you had to throw in a late second probably for Pollard. With Pollard, I would probably go do that. Pollard for McLaurin and Tyler Boyd. Pollard for Ferguson and Michael Wilson. Probably lean Pollard in that deal. Pollard and Rashad White. So, like, where are you banking on who's going to have the better finish down the stretch? And then Pollard for DJ Moore. And I think with Justin Fields back, I'm going to smash the DJ Moore side. I mean, DJ Moore, his target share is over 28% with Justin Fields. Fantasy points per game is one of the top 12 wide receivers in the game in terms of with Justin Fields and the splits. So if you're going to look at it from that perspective, that might be one of those deals that you float out there. You see if you can kind of go get him and you value that, right? Now, as we kind of look at Pollard's overall dynasty value, I don't hate going and grabbing him if you're a dynasty contender and you really need that running back, right? So if you're looking at his schedule down the stretch, Buffalo, Miami, and Detroit are his playoff schedule. I don't mind that. I do think that, it's at Buffalo, at Miami, but those games could be shootouts, especially the Miami game. I think that could be a fun game. I think they're going to get him more involved in the offense. Now, if it's a late first, 10 to 12 in that range, so 110, 111, 112, I don't mind the risk. It's still risky, though. But if I can maybe go move an asset, you saw some of those deals that happen, and you're going to go after Pollard, you can. Maybe a second and an auxiliary piece, a wide receiver 3, or like with upside, right? Maybe you kind of ship them off and you go get Pollard. But if you're anywhere in the middle, if your team's not going to contend and your team is looking at like, hey, I don't need Tony Pollard in this roster, I would shoot for a first. That's how I would look at Tony Pollard's value. So Appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope this helps. Let me know in the comments if you have any trades out there you want me to talk about with you. Just drop them below. Even if it's not Tony Pollard, I kind of get into it with you. So appreciate you guys. I'll check you guys next time.